She crossed a continent to marry a man she had never met. When the stagecoach stopped, three strangers stood in the street. Not her groom, his brothers. And the word they used was not is. It was. Everett Lockhart had been dead for 5 days, but the ledger he left behind was about to start a war. Now let us go back to that Tuesday afternoon in Montana, 1878, and find out what happened next. The stagecoach pulled into Redstone Hollow, Montana territory on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week of July, 1878. And the first thing Calla Ashford noticed was the silence, not the absence of sound. There was plenty of that. Wheels grinding on packed dirt, the driver grunting as he set the brake, horses stamping and snorting, wanting water and rest after the long climb through the foothills. Those sounds were ordinary, expected, the kind of noise that belonged to a Tuesday afternoon in a mountain town at the edge of the known world. It was the other kind of silence she noticed, the human kind, the kind that happens when a town full of people decides at the same moment to look away. Calla stepped down from the coach in her navy blue traveling dress. The good one, the one she had pressed twice during the journey west and guarded from dust and coffee spills with the particular vigilance of a woman who understood that first impressions were sometimes the only kind you got. Her honey blonde hair was pinned up in the modest style she had practiced in the mirror of a boarding house in St. Louis 4 days ago. Those soft tendrils had escaped around her temples during the final hours of the mountain road, and she had stopped trying to fix them somewhere around the last river crossing. She carried one trunk, one carpet bag, and a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. 47 letters from a man named Everett Lockhart, each one written in careful, precise handwriting on paper that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. She had read every one of them at least 3 times. She could recite passages from memory. She had crossed a continent to meet him, this man she had fallen in love with, through the particular slant of his handwriting and the quiet honesty of his words. The trunk was set on the ground beside her. The driver tipped his hat without meeting her eyes and climbed back up. Nobody came forward. There were people on the street. She could see them. A woman sweeping a porch who had stopped mid-stroke. A man in the doorway of the general store who had turned to examine something on the shelf behind him with sudden intense interest. 2 children who had been playing in the dirt and were now being pulled inside by hands attached to arms attached to bodies that did not want to be seen pulling children inside. Calla stood in the afternoon sun with her trunk at her feet and her letters in her hand, and she felt the specific cold that comes not from temperature, but from understanding that something is very wrong before you know what it is. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now. I share new frontier stories every week. And drop a comment below, tell me where you are listening from tonight. Now let us go back to that dusty street in Montana, 1878, and find out what Calla Ashford walked into. She picked up her carpet bag and walked toward the general store because it was the only building with a name she could read, Dawson's Dry Goods. And because the man in the doorway, despite his sudden fascination with his own inventory, was at least a physical presence she could direct a question toward. "Excuse me," she said. "I am looking for the Lockhart homestead. Everett Lockhart. I was told someone would meet me here." The man turned. Dawson himself, she would learn later. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on another human face before that moment, and would never forget afterward. It was the expression of a man who was watching something terrible happen to someone and could not stop it and did not want to be the one to explain why. "Miss," he said, and stopped. "Ashford," she said. "Calla Ashford. Everett was expecting me. We arranged. He placed an advertisement, and I answered, and we have been corresponding for 4 months, and I was told someone would meet me at the—" "Miss Ashford." Another voice, behind her. She turned. 3 men stood in the street. They had not been there a moment ago, or she had not seen them, which amounted to the same thing. They were standing in a formation that was not quite a line spaced apart with the unconscious geometry of men who were accustomed to watching each other's flanks. And they were all tall, strikingly, unmistakably tall. The kind of tall that did not just mean height, but something else. Something built by years of labor and mountain living, and the particular demands of a land that did not forgive weakness. The one in front was the tallest, the oldest. Dark brown hair with streaks of sun through it, amber eyes that looked like they had been lit from somewhere deep inside and then deliberately dimmed. He took off his hat. The gesture was formal and slow. And Calla understood it before he spoke the way you understand certain things, not through words, but through the particular grammar of grief that has its own language, older than English, older than names. Miss Ashford, he said, I am Silas Lockhart. Everett was my brother. Was. The word landed in the center of her chest and stayed there. These are my brothers, he continued. Emmett, the second one chestnut-haired quieter in the way of a man who communicated through presence rather than speech, nodded once. A hunting knife hung at his belt. His eyes moved constantly, reading the street the way another man might read a newspaper. And Boone, the third auburn-haired, the youngest. His jaw was tight and his eyes were red in a way he was clearly trying to hide, and he said nothing. His hands hung at his sides, and there was something about the way they hung that suggested they wanted to be doing something, hitting something, breaking something, anything other than this. Calla looked at Silas. What she said. Silas held her gaze. Everett was killed 5 days ago, Miss Ashford, on the porch of our homestead. 2 men came on horseback. They shot him twice. He never finished his morning coffee. The letters in her hand, 47 of them, 4 months of careful handwriting. Descriptions of mountains she had not yet seen, plans for a schoolhouse he wanted to build. The phrase he had used in his last letter, the one that had made her cry on a train in Nebraska. I have built a life here that is missing only one thing, and I believe that thing is you. She did not faint. She did not scream. She did not drop the letters or press her hand to her mouth or do any of the things that the people of Redstone Hollow might have expected from a young woman in a blue dress receiving the worst news of her life on a dusty street in a town she had never seen before. She stood very still. She breathed in and she breathed out, and she asked the only question that mattered. Who did it? Silas looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. The recognition of a man who had been told to expect something and was now seeing it confirmed. Not here, he said. They rode to the homestead in silence. Calla on a gentle mare that Emmett had brought her trunk tied behind Boone's saddle. The 3 brothers surrounding her in a formation she realized after a mile was not random. Silas in front, Emmett on the left, eyes constantly scanning the tree line, reading the forest. The way he read everything. Quiet, thorough, missing nothing. Boone behind, watching the road they had just traveled with the particular intensity of a young man who wanted something to ride at and had not yet found it. They were guarding her. She had been on their land for less than an hour, and they were already guarding her. The trail climbed through stands of lodgepole pines so tall and straight they looked like columns holding up the sky. The air changed as they gained elevation. Cooler, thinner, carrying the scent of pine resin and wild sage, and the particular mineral smell of mountain water running over stone. Calla had lived her entire life in Boston, where the air tasted of coal smoke and harbor brine, and this air felt like drinking something clean for the first time, after years of not knowing the water had been dirty. The Lockhart homestead sat in a valley between 2 ridges of the Absaroka Range, a collection of log structures that had been built by men who intended to stay. The main cabin was large, larger than she had imagined from Everett's letters, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that ran the length of the front. There was a barn with tools hanging in neat rows, each one in its assigned place, the mark of men who live by discipline and routine. A smokehouse, a root cellar, and a smaller cabin set apart from the rest that no one pointed to or explained, but that had the particular stillness of a place that held a story no one was ready to tell. It was beautiful. The mountains rose green and blue and impossible behind it, and the creek that Everett had described in his letters, the one where he said he ate his lunch on fine days and thought about the person who would someday sit beside him, ran silver over stones at the edge of the yard. And on the hill behind the homestead, under a tall pine, there was a wooden cross. New, the dirt around it still fresh and dark against the summer grass. Calla looked at it from the porch. She did not ask. She did not need to. Inside the cabin was clean but spare. A man's home organized by function rather than comfort. Everett's things were still everywhere. His coat on the hook by the door, his boots by the hearth. A book open on the table with a passage underlined in the margin, a sentence he had meant to come back to and never would. His coffee cup still sitting where he had set it the morning he died because nobody had been able to move it yet. Emmett brought her tea, It was strong and slightly bitter, brewed the way men who lived alone brewed tea, more about function than flavor. Calla drank it without comment because she understood that the offering was the thing, not the quality. The cup was warm in her hands, and the cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine, and the particular absence that a person leaves behind in the spaces they occupied, and she held the tea, and she breathed, and she waited. They sat around the table, the four of them in a kitchen that had been built for a family and now held something else. And Silas told her. He told her about Garrett Holloway. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has told himself something enough times to tell it without breaking. His voice was level, his hands were still on the table. His amber eyes carried the cost of the control in a flatness that Calla would later learn to read as the opposite of emptiness. He told her that Holloway owned or claimed to own half the territory between Redstone Hollow and the Missouri River, that he had built his empire not through honest dealing, but through intimidation, forged documents, bribed county officials, and when none of those worked, through men who arrived in the night and left behind things that were difficult to explain as accidents. He told her that Everett had worked for Holloway for 4 years as a bookkeeper handling land records and financial accounts, and that Everett had been honest. Too honest for the game Holloway actually needed done, which was making the numbers look clean. Everett kept records, Silas said, not Holloway's records, his own, a separate ledger. Calla's hands tightened around the cup. He documented everything. Silas continued in that careful, measured voice. Names, dates, amounts paid, deeds altered, families displaced. 47 families in 3 counties over 6 years. Run off their land by fear or force or fraud, and every one of them written down in Everett's hand. Where is it? Calla asked. Silas looked at her. Emmett looked at the table. Boone looked at the wall. Everett hid it, Silas said, before he died. He told Emmett it was in the root cellar under a false board, 3rd row from the north wall, the one with the grain running crosswise. He paused. His jaw worked once. He said his bride would know what to do with it. The room was quiet except for the fire and the wind outside and the particular sound that grief makes when it fills a space that was supposed to hold something else entirely. He never met me, Calla said. He said I would know what to do with it, and he never once met me. Emmett spoke then. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her, and his voice was lower than Silas's, steadier in a different way. The voice of a man who said things once and meant them. He knew you through your letters, Emmett said. He read every one of yours to us at dinner, not the private parts. He paused. The parts about what you believed in, why you were coming west, what kind of woman you were. Boone stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. He went to the window and stood with his back to all of them, and his shoulders moved once in a way that he would have denied if anyone had mentioned it. Outside, the cross on the hill was visible through the glass, and Boone looked at it the way a man looks at something he cannot yet accept as permanent. Calla set down her tea. She placed both hands flat on the table the way she had seen her father do when he was about to say something that mattered, and she looked at the 3 men who had lost their brother and found his intended bride standing on a dusty street with a bundle of letters and nowhere to go. I came to marry a man, she said, and her voice was steady because she was making it steady the way you make something steady by holding it with both hands. He is gone, I understand that, but I did not cross 2,000 miles to turn around. She looked at Silas. Show me the ledger. The root cellar was dark and cool and smelled of earth and stored potatoes and the damp stone walls that kept everything at a temperature the summer heat could not reach. Emmett led the way with a lantern. The flame threw shadows that moved like living things against the rough timber ceiling. The false board was exactly where Everett had said, 3rd row from the north wall, the one with the grain running crosswise. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with a cord of rawhide, was a leather satchel. Inside the satchel were 43 pages of Everett Lockhart's careful handwriting. Calla sat at the kitchen table and read them. She read for 2 hours without stopping. The brothers gave her the space. Silas stood on the porch looking at the cross on the hill. Emmett sharpened his knife by the fire with the slow, rhythmic patience of a man who understood that some things could not be hurried and should not be interrupted. The blade moved across the whetstone in a sound that was almost musical, steady as a heartbeat. Boone paced. Boone always paced. What she found in those 43 pages was this: 47 families, 3 counties, Beaverhead, Madison, Gallatin. 6 years of systematic land theft executed with the precision of a man who understood that the law was only as strong as the men who enforced it, and who had made certain that the men who enforced it answered to him. The methods were consistent. First, the offer always below market value, then the pressure delivered through county officials Holloway had purchased like tools from a catalog. Then for families who refused the visits from men like Cole Ratcher, who explained in quiet, careful terms what would happen next. For families who still refused after that, things happened. Barns burned, cattle disappeared in the night, fences were cut, wells went bad. And for the families who had the particular misfortune of being adjacent to land Holloway, especially one of the things that happened were worse. Everett had documented all of it. Names of men paid for specific acts, dates and locations, amounts transferred through intermediary accounts, county officials who had signed falsified deeds, a fire inspector in Abilene, Montana, who had ruled a cabin fire as accidental despite the stove being only 2 months old. Calla stopped reading at that entry. She looked up. Silas was standing in the doorway now, silhouetted against the late afternoon light, watching her. His face was still. His eyes were not. Abilene, she said. Yes, he said. Margaret and William. A muscle moved in his jaw. The only movement. Yes, it is in here, Silas. Everett documented it. There is a name. A man Holloway paid directly. Not through Ratcher. $200. The date is March 14th, 1876. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Calla had ever heard. Emmett's knife stopped moving. The whetstone went quiet. Boone turned from the window. Silas walked to the table. He sat down across from Calla. He put both palms flat on the wood the way a man does when he needs to feel something solid beneath his hands, because everything else has become uncertain. And he read the entry that documented the murder of his wife and his 4-year-old son, written in his dead brother's careful hand. Everett knew, Calla said softly. He knew for months. He was building a case. Emmett's voice from the fireplace. He wrote to a federal judge in Helena 4 months ago, a man named Crawford. Said Crawford was the only judge in the territory Holloway had not touched. He never told me. Silas said it without accusation, just the plain fact of it, the strange ache of learning something new about someone who was gone. He was protecting you, Calla said. He was afraid of what you would do if you knew. Silas looked at her. She held his gaze. She had known this man for less than 3 hours, and she was telling him something about his dead brother that cut close to bone, and she did not look away because she understood already that Silas Lockhart was a man who valued truth, delivered straight over comfort, delivered sideways. He was right to be afraid, Silas said quietly. Yes, Calla said. He was. But he was also building something larger than revenge. He was building a record, and he believed that the record would be enough, that if it reached the right hands, the law would do what law is supposed to do. She gathered the pages carefully. She retied the rawhide cord. She placed the satchel on the table between them. I am going to Helena, she said. I am going to put this in front of Judge Crawford. Everett intended to do it himself. He did not get the chance. I will. Boone turned from the window. Helena is 200 miles through territory Holloway controls. I am aware of the geography. Holloway has men on every road between here and there. Then I will take roads that are not roads. She looked at Emmett. Everett wrote in his letters that you know every pass between here and the Yellowstone. Is that true? It is true, Emmett said. Then help me find a route. She looked at Boone. Everett wrote that you are the best shot in the family and the first one through any door. Is that true? Boone's jaw worked. Something shifted in his expression. Grief and gratitude and the particular confusion of a young man who had expected a mail-order bride from Boston to be fragile and was discovering in real time that she was not. It is true, he said. She looked at Silas, and this was the moment when something shifted between them. Not romance, nothing so simple or clean, but recognition. The same recognition you feel when you meet someone who carries their weight the same way you carry yours. Not easily, not lightly, but forward. I did not come here to turn around, she said. Everett asked me to come because he believed I was the kind of person who would finish what needed finishing. He was right about that. Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he said Everett was usually right about people. Then trust his judgment, Calla said. and helped me get to Helena. They spent the next day preparing. Emmett mapped routes, 3 options, each with advantages and dangers, each avoiding the main roads Holloway's men would be watching. He spread the routes across the table and explained them with the quiet precision of a man who understood terrain, the way scholars understood texts. And Calla listened and asked questions that revealed she had been paying attention to every geographical detail in Everett's letters. And Emmett noticed this, and something that might have been approval moved briefly across his face. Boone checked weapons, packed supplies, argued with Silas about strategy in the particular way of brothers who had been arguing about strategy for their entire lives and would continue doing so regardless of whether it produced results. Calla organized the satchel. She went through every page again, making mental notes of names and dates, creating an index in her head the way her father had taught her to organize information. The schoolmaster's daughter. Still, it was late afternoon, the light going gold through the cabin windows when Silas came to find her on the porch. She was sitting in the chair that she had learned from the way no one else sat in it had been Everett's. The wood was worn smooth where his arms had rested. The view from it looked directly at the creek he had described in his letters. She understood now why he had loved this chair. From here, you could see everything he had been building toward. "I need to tell you something," Silas said, "before we leave in the morning." She waited. She had already learned in less than 2 days that Silas needed silence the way some men needed encouragement. Not because he was unwilling to speak, but because he was choosing his words with the care of a man who understood that some words once said changed the shape of everything around them. 3 weeks ago, he said, "Garrett Holloway came to me. Personally, not through Ratcher, not through any of his usual men. He came to this porch." Calla went still. "He offered me $100 to find the ledger." He knew Everett had been keeping records. He did not know where. He said if I found the ledger and brought back anyone who had it, the money was mine, and the matter would be closed. Calla's hand moved to the satchel on her lap. Her fingers closed around the leather. "I took the money," Silas said. He said it flat, without excuse, without the kind of softening that a lesser man might have applied to make it easier to hear. "I wrote out. I told myself it was just a job, just paper, not my business." What changed? Her voice was careful and tight because she had been lied to before, not often but memorably, and she had learned to distinguish between the lie that serves a liar and the truth that costs the teller. "I came back." "That is not an answer." "I know." He put his hat on the porch rail. The amber light caught the side of his face and showed her for the first time the full weight of what he carried. It was not visible in his posture or his hands or the set of his shoulders. It was in his eyes. The particular kind of flatness that comes not from emptiness, but from having felt too much and deciding to feel less. "I came back because I got 20 miles from here, and I sat on a ridge and I looked at the money, and I thought about Margaret." The name entered the air between them like something that had been waiting for permission. "And I thought about William." His voice was perfectly carefully steady. The voice of a man who had said something so many times in his own head that he had learned to say it without flinching, and the learning had cost him more than the thing itself. "And I thought if Margaret had been able to run, if she had found one person on the road who was not going to look the other way." He turned to face Calla. "I could not be the person who looked the other way. Not again. Not for Holloway's money." "Where is the money?" she asked. "Bottom of the creek. All of it, every dollar." She nodded once. It was not forgiveness. She was not in a position to forgive, and he had not asked for it. It was acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who understood that the man in front of her had been in a dark place and had chosen to walk out of it, and that the choosing was the thing, not the place he had been. "Everett wrote about you in his letter," she said. "He said you were the most trustworthy person he knew, and also the most stubborn, and that you would argue with a fence post if you thought the fence post was wrong." Something moved at the corner of Silas's mouth. Not a smile. The memory of where a smile used to live. "He wrote about you too," Silas said. "He said you were the bravest person he had never met." The air between them held something. Neither of them named it. Neither of them needed to. "Not yet. We leave at first light," Silas said. "I will be ready," Calla said. That night, Calla slept in Everett's room. His brothers had offered her the best bed in the cabin, which happened to be his, and she had accepted because refusing would have made it harder for everyone. She lay in the bed that smelled faintly of pine and soap in the particular absence that a person leaves behind, and she opened the last letter Everett had sent her, the one that had arrived in Boston the day before she boarded the train. Dear Calla, by the time you read this, you will be on your way, and I will be here waiting, which is a thing I have not been good at historically, but am learning for your sake. I want you to know that whatever happens, and I write those words deliberately, because life in this territory has a way of making plans look foolish, I have arranged for you to be taken care of. My brothers will see to it. Silas, most of all. He is rough in the way that mountains are rough, which is to say that the roughness is not the point. The point is what is underneath. I have done something that may put people at risk. I have kept a record of things that powerful men would prefer stayed unrecorded. I am going to make it right, or I am going to die trying, and I would very much like for it to be the former. But I am an honest man, Calla, and honest men prepare for both. If the worst should happen, the ledger is in the root cellar. Third board crosswise grain. Take it to Judge Walter Crawford in Helena. He is expecting it. He is expecting you. You are the bravest person I have never met. I intend for that to change very soon. Yours, Everett. She folded the letter and held it against her chest and lay in the dark and breathed. He had known. He had known it might happen, and he had built the road ahead of time for her to walk. She did not cry, not because she was too strong for it, but because the tears were not ready yet. They were somewhere deep, working their way toward the surface on their own schedule, and she had learned from losing her father, from losing her position, from every small and large loss that had brought her to this bed, in this cabin, in these mountains. That grief arrived when it chose to not, when you invited it. She slept. She dreamed of a man she had never met, writing letters at a kitchen table with a lamp burning low, his careful hand filling page after page with the names of people he had never known, because the truth unrecorded was the truth lost. They left before dawn. Calla on Rosie the gentle mare, Silas on Cannon, his dark chestnut, who moved with the quiet confidence of a horse that had been to hard places and come back. Emmett on a gray stallion he called Ghost, because the horse moved through trees without making a sound, which Calla found either impressive or unsettling, depending on the moment. Boone on a bay named Trouble, which Calla thought was appropriate. The first day was the mountains. Emmett led. He knew the backcountry the way other men knew the streets of their hometowns. Every ridge, every creek crossing, every deer trail that connected to something larger. He read the ground the way Calla read books, fluently, instinctively, with a lifelong literacy that made the process look effortless to anyone who did not understand what they were watching. They avoided the main road out of Redstone Hollow, entirely cutting north through a series of pine valleys that Everett's letters had described, but that Calla had never imagined could be this vast, this silent, this overwhelmingly beautiful, in a way that made her feel both very small and very present. The air tasted of pine resin and cold stone, and something green and alive that had no name, but that her lungs recognized as necessary. Birds she could not identify called from the high branches. A creek appeared and disappeared beside the trail. Its water so clear she could count the stones on the bottom, running fast and cold from snowfields she could not see, but knew were there somewhere above, feeding everything below. At midday, they stopped to water the horses at a creek that came down off the ridge, cold and sharp. Calla dismounted and stretched her legs and realized that her body was already filing formal complaints about the hours in the saddle. She had ridden before. Her father had taught her on rented horses in the parks outside Boston, but riding through a Boston park and riding through the Montana backcountry were related activities in the same way that wading in a bathtub was related to crossing a river. Emmett came to sit beside her on a fallen log. This was unusual. Emmett did not sit beside people. He sat near them in the way of a man who preferred a comfortable distance from which to observe. Sitting beside someone was for Emmett an act of deliberate closeness, and Calla recognized it as such. You ride well, he said, filling canteens from the creek. I ride adequately, Calla said. Everett may have overstated my abilities in his letters. Everett never overstated anything. Emmett's voice carried the particular warmth of a man talking about someone he had loved and lost and was still figuring out how to talk about. If he said you could ride, he meant something he saw in you that would make you ride when you had to. And now I have to. Now you have to. There was a silence between them. Comfortable. the kind of silence that Emmett inhabited naturally and that Calla was learning to appreciate. The pass tomorrow, Emmett said. Blackthorn. It is the fastest way through the eastern range, also the most dangerous after rain. The trail narrows to single horse width for a quarter-mile, rock walls on both sides. If the runoff has turned the footing, it could be bad. Can we get through? I do not deal in certainties, Emmett said. The mountains do not allow it. He looked at her with those calm, assessing eyes. But I will get you through. That is not a probability. That is a commitment. Calla believed him, and the distinction he had just drawn between probability and commitment was the most Emmett thing she had ever heard. She left him at the creek and walked across the clearing to where Boone sat alone, his back against a tree, his hat pulled low. He had spoken less today than yesterday. The grief was settling deeper, she understood. Moving from the surface where it could be channeled into action to the interior, where it became something quieter and harder to reach. She sat down beside him without asking permission, because asking would have given him the option to refuse, and she had already decided that refusing was not what he needed. I want to know about Everett, she said. Not from his letters, from you. Boone did not move, did not look at her. Under the brim of his hat, his jaw was set so tight she could see the muscle working. He used to catch frogs in that creek behind the homestead, Boone said, after a silence so long she thought he was not going to answer. When we were boys, he would catch them and hold them up and say, "Look, Boone, this one has thoughts," and he would spend 10 minutes explaining what thoughts the frog was having. He made up names for all of them. He kept records of the frogs, how many he had seen, what creek, what day. He kept records of frogs, Calla said. He kept records of everything. Boone pulled his hat up. His eyes were wet, and he was not hiding it, and the not hiding was a form of trust that the younger brother was extending to her because she had asked, and because she was the woman Everett had chosen, and because some grief needs witness more than it needs privacy. That was who he was. He wrote things down because he believed that what was written was what was real. It is real, Calla said. 47 families. It is all real, and he made it permanent. Boone looked at her for a long time. You would have been good for him, he said, and the words carried a weight of loss that went beyond the romantic. The loss of a future that would never happen. The brother and the bride and the life on the homestead that Everett had described in his careful letters. I know, she said. And then, come eat. You owe it to him to be strong enough to finish this. Something shifted in Boone's expression. Not resolution, not yet, but the first cousin of it. The recognition that this woman, this stranger who had crossed 2,000 miles to marry his brother, was not going to let him disappear into his grief. He stood up. He came to eat. They reached Pine Ridge on the second day, a small town tucked into a low valley between two dry ridges. The kind of place that did not ask questions because the answers had historically been inconvenient. A cluster of buildings along one unpaved street, everything the color of dust and old wood. The kind of place you pass through, the kind of place that remembered faces but forgot names on purpose. Ada Thornton's establishment was called the Copper Kettle, technically a boarding house, technically a restaurant, technically a saloon, none of which it advertised. It was the largest building on the street by a full story, and when Silas pushed through the door with Calla behind him and the other two brothers behind her, the silver-haired woman behind the counter looked up from the glass she was wiping and said without any particular surprise, "Silas Lockhart, you look like the mountains chewed you up." "They did," he said. "I need room's dinner and your door locked tonight." Ada Thornton was somewhere north of 40 and south of 60 and made no apparent effort to narrow the gap. She had sharp, dark eyes that took in everything without appearing to, and the bearing of a woman who had learned long ago that the world was easier to navigate if you gave it less to push against. 3 years ago, Garrett Holloway had tried to buy her place. She had thrown his money back through his window in coins. One at a time. She set down the glass. She looked at Calla, looked at the satchel Calla carried, looked at the three brothers arranged around her like a wall made of muscle and determination. "The Lockhart bride," Ada said. "Not a question. I am," Calla said. Present tense, and it cost her something. And she used it anyway. "Heard about Everett." Ada's voice was measured. "I am sorry for it. Thank you. Holloway's men came through 3 days ago, asked about a woman traveling with a leather bag. I told them I had not seen any young bride, And I doubted I would, since any woman with sense would take the south road, not the north. Ada pulled a key from under the counter and set it on the bar. They took the south road. Calla let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like days. They will figure it out, Silas said. By tomorrow morning, maybe sooner. We need to move before first light. I will have food in an hour, Ada said. Rooms at the top of the stairs. Second door. There is a bolt. She picked up the glass again and went back to wiping it. I assume the arrangement is separate rooms. Yes, Calla said. Yes, all three brothers said. At the same time, in the same tone, with the same expression of men who had just been asked a question they considered so obvious it barely warranted answering. Ada looked between them with the particular expression of a woman who had seen every possible combination of human situation walk through her door and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Separate rooms, she agreed. Dinner in an hour. They ate at the corner table. Venison stew and cornbread and coffee so strong it could have started an argument. The food was the best thing Calla had eaten since leaving Boston, not because it was extraordinary, but because hunger and exhaustion had stripped her ability to evaluate quality down to a single criterion. It was warm, it was food, and she was alive to eat it. She ate fast. She noticed all three brothers ate the same way, efficiently, without ceremony. The way men ate, who had spent years knowing that meals were not guaranteed. When she had slowed down enough to breathe between bites, she looked across the table at Silas. You said you had been a bounty hunter for 9 years. I did. 31 men brought in, that is correct. And you never killed a man who was not trying to kill you first. He set down his fork, picked up his coffee, wrapped both hands around the cup. Never, he said. Did Everett know about your work? Everett knew everything about me. He was the one who kept asking me to stop. Silas's voice softened, and the softening was more revealing than anything she had heard from him. He said a man who was good at finding people could find better uses for the skill. He was right. He was usually right. I have mentioned that. She looked at Boone. Boone had been quiet for most of the meal, holding something inside that was not small and getting harder to hold. Boone, she said, and used his name deliberately, because she sensed that he was the brother most at risk of being lost inside his own grief, and names were anchors. He looked at her. His eyes were very like Silas's, the same amber, the same intensity. But where Silas's had been deliberately flattened, Boone's burned. Everything about him burned. Everett and I were supposed to ride to Helena together, Boone said. His voice was rough. Next month, he was going to deliver the ledger. I was going to watch his back. We had it planned. He stopped. We had it all planned. The table was quiet. Then we will go together, Calla said. Different plan, same destination. It was 11 o'clock at night when the knock came. Not on her door, on the wall, the shared wall between her room and the hallway. 2 taps, a pause. 2 more, deliberate and subtle. She was on her feet before she had consciously decided to move. She opened the door a crack. Silas stood in the hallway, already dressed, hat in hand. His face was serious but controlled. The specific look of a man delivering news that needed to be heard without panic. Cole Ratcher just rode into town, he said quietly. He is at the stable right now, alone. The others are probably circling in from the south road. Calla's hand gripped the doorframe. He found us. He found Pine Ridge. He does not know we are here yet. We have maybe 20 minutes. Get your bag. Leave everything else. Calla. She had used his first name without meaning to, and in the dim hallway she realized it was the first time. He noticed. He did not remark on it. I need you to know something, she said. She held his gaze. I will not be the reason anyone gets hurt. If it comes to a choice between me and the ledger, it will not, he said. And the way he said it, not reassuring, not dismissive, just certain, the way a man states a fact he has already decided on, made her believe him, even though she knew the math of it was more complicated than he was admitting. She grabbed the satchel. It had not left her body since the root cellar. She slept with it. She ate with it. It had become an extension of her, the way Everett's careful handwriting had become a voice she heard even though she had never heard his actual voice. They slipped out through the kitchen. Ada held the door open with one hand and pressed a wrapped bundle of biscuits into Calla's hands with the other. East Road past the creek bed, Ada said softly. Follow it past the old Miller homestead. It is abandoned. Do not let it spook you. It will bring you to the base of Blackthorn Pass by mid-morning. Thank you, Calla said. Do not thank me. Ada looked at her with those dark measuring eyes. Then she looked at Silas and something passed between them that Calla did not entirely understand but felt like history and trust and the particular bond that forms between people who have both been on the wrong side of a powerful man and survived it. Just get to Crawford, Ada said, and you had better come back from this. She said it to Silas, and her voice carried something that was neither sentiment nor command, but the particular mixture of both that only a woman who had been through enough of the world to know its costs could produce. The horses were already saddled. Emmett had done that first before anyone else was awake. Quiet, efficient, the work of a man who prepared for departures the way he prepared for everything, thoroughly and in advance. The night was clear, stars hard and bright overhead, so many of them that the sky looked like it had been scattered with salt. The wet earth gave off that particular smell of Montana's summer after rain, pine and stone and cold water, and something alive beneath the mud. Cannon moved quiet and sure. Ghost lived up to his name. Rosie, freshly rested, followed without complaint. Trouble carried Boone into the dark with the steady gait of a horse that had learned from its rider that the answer to difficulty was to go through it, not around it. They rode east. Behind them in the direction of the stable, a single lantern moved, searching. Calla did not look back. Dawn came slowly to the Montana backcountry. Not the sudden bright arrival of a city morning, but a gradual lightning that started somewhere behind the peaks and worked its way forward in stages. Blue becoming gray, gray warming to gold, until the trees made shadows in the trailhead shape, and the four riders moving east along the creek bed could trust the ground enough to pick up pace. Emmett led the way he always did, without speaking, without hesitating, his eyes moving across the terrain in a constant quiet conversation with the land that no one else was invited to join. He saw things in the dirt, in the bark, in the angle of broken branches that were invisible to Calla, but that told him stories as clearly as the printed page. Behind him, Silas and Calla rode side by side where the trail allowed it single file where it did not. Boone covered the rear, one hand always near his gun, his eyes doing the constant sweep of a man who expected trouble and intended to meet it before it arrived. The trail wound through stands of lodgepole pines so dense the sky became a narrow blue ribbon overhead. The air was thick with the smell of pine resin warming in the early sun, and the particular mineral scent of mountain water running somewhere nearby, always nearby in this country, feeding everything from beneath. Calla breathed it in and felt something in her chest ease slightly. Not the grief. The grief was permanent, and she knew it, but the tightness around it. The land itself was doing something to her that she had not expected. It was making room. They rode for an hour in silence before Calla spoke. The men behind us, she said. You know their names, Cole Ratcher, Silas said. Holloway's chief enforcer, the one who does the talking before the doing. There is another called Cooper. Those are the two I know. He paused. Everett mentioned a third, a tracker named Dutch. I have not seen him. What does that mean? It means he is somewhere I cannot see him, which is worse. Calla absorbed this. She watched the trail ahead, where Emmett moved through the trees like part of the forest itself, reading signs she could not see. A broken branch, a stone turned dark side up, the particular way moss grew on the north side of fallen timber. Tell me about Ratcher, she said. Silas was quiet for a moment. The horses moved beneath them. Cannon's hooves found the solid ground with the confidence of long practice. Ratcher is the one Holloway sends when he wants something done carefully, Silas said. When he wants something done visibly, when he wants people to know what happens to those who resist, he sends someone else. Someone who burns things, Calla said. She had read the ledger. She knew the entries. Emmett's horse shifted ahead of them, the rhythm changing slightly. He had heard even from 20 feet ahead, and the hearing had registered in his body like a change in weather. Everett documented the fires, Calla continued. She kept her voice level because someone had to, and she had realized over these 2 days that in this particular company of men, each carrying his own version of a weight, none of them discussed openly, the person who kept the conversation steady was performing a function as essential as Emmett reading the trail or Boone watching their rear. Everett's barn, she said. 6 months ago. He wrote in his letters that lightning struck it, but the ledger says different. Silas nodded slowly. Everett said it was lightning. I do not think Everett believed it was lightning. He believed it was a warning. Yes, and he kept recording anyway. That was Everett. They rode. The trail opened and Calla brought Rosie up beside Cannon, and for a while they moved in parallel, the horses finding their own rhythm together, the way horses do when the riders are in accord. Silas, she said. Yeah, tell me about Margaret. The name landed between them like something dropped from a height. She watched him carry it, watched the way his jaw set and his hands went still on the reins, and his eyes, those amber eyes that had been carefully flat since the moment she met him, moved through something that was not flatness at all, but its opposite. Something enormous and alive that he kept behind a door he had learned to keep closed. Not yet, he said. She nodded. She did not push. She understood the words the way they were meant. Not as refusal, but as promise. Not yet. Not here, not on a trail with danger behind them and the morning still young. But eventually, because he was the kind of man who paid his debts, including the ones that were just about honesty. At midday, they stopped in a grove of aspens that Emmett found tucked into a fold in the hills, invisible for more than 50 yards. A spring ran cold and clear from somewhere underground. The kind of place a man could spend his whole life in these mountains and never find unless he had Emmett's particular gift for understanding where the land hid its generosities. Emmett found her at the spring where the horses drank. He crouched beside the water and picked up a stick and began turning it in his hands, the habitual motion of a man whose hands needed to be working while his mind worked separately. He did not sit. He rarely did when the ground was unfamiliar. But he stayed close, which for Emmett meant something. I want to show you something, he said. He pointed to the ground near the spring. See that branch? Broken at shoulder height. Fresh break, sap still wet. Someone came through here, Calla said, within the last 6 hours. Now look at the ground beside it. See the stone. Dark side up. When a stone sits in earth for years, the underside stays damp and dark. When it gets turned, you can tell how recently by the color. He moved to a patch of moss on a fallen log. And this, moss scraped off at boot height, not hoof height, means a man on foot, not horseback. You are teaching me to read tracks, Calla said. I am teaching you to read the land, Emmett said. He looked at her with those calm, assessing eyes that missed nothing. You should know these things, in case you find yourself alone and need to know who is coming. He said it simply, without drama. But the meaning beneath it was clear. He was giving her tools to survive without them. Not because he doubted they would be there, but because he respected her enough to prepare her for the possibility that they would not. Thank you, Calla said. Emmett nodded once and went back to his stick. The lesson was over. The gift had been given. That was Emmett's way of showing care, through competence rather than words. She was walking back across the clearing toward camp when she heard the sound. Not words, impact. The sound of a fist hitting bark. And then again, and again. Boone was standing at the far edge of the trees. He had found a pine with bark thick enough to absorb the blow, and he was hitting it. Not in rage exactly, in something worse. The particular desperation of a young man who needed to do something with the pain in his body and had no target except the world itself. His knuckles were bleeding. She could see the skin splitting across the second and third knuckles of his right hand. He pulled back for another strike. Calla caught his arm. She did not grab it. She placed her hand on his forearm just above the wrist, and she held it. Not with strength, with presence. She was not strong enough to stop him physically, and they both knew it. She was strong enough to remind him that he was not alone, and that was the thing that actually mattered. Boone froze, his arm trembling, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild with something that was not anger, but looked like it from the outside the way a house fire looks like a sunset from far enough away. They are always ahead of us, he said. His voice cracked. Always. Everett planned, Everett prepared, Everett did everything right. And they shot him on the porch on a Tuesday morning. He had not finished his coffee. His fist opened slowly, blood on his knuckles, sap and bark embedded in the cuts. Everett did not want you to break your hands because of him, Calla said quietly. He wanted you to use them to finish what he started. Boone looked at her, eyes wet, not hiding it. And the not hiding was a kind of bravery that Calla recognized because it was the same kind she practiced. The bravery of allowing someone to see you in the place where you are weakest. He would have liked you, Boone said. He would have really liked you. I know, she said. Now let Emmett clean those knuckles before they get infected. We ride tomorrow and you need both hands on the reins. Boone looked at his hands, at the blood, at the bark still stuck to his skin. And something moved in his face that was not quite acceptance, but was the first step on the road toward it. The recognition that breaking himself was not the same as honoring his brother, and that the woman standing in front of him understood the difference, even if he had momentarily forgotten it. He followed her back to camp. That night they made camp in a sheltered spot at the base of the eastern ridge. Tomorrow they would hit Blackthorn Pass and Emmett wanted them rested. A small fire carefully screened with stones and green branches so the light would not carry. Venison jerky and the last of Ada's biscuits. The stars so thick overhead that Calla, who had lived her whole life in a city where the sky held a dozen pale points, at best felt as though the universe had turned itself inside out to show her what it actually looked like. They were sitting around the fire, Emmett sharpening his knife, the blade whispering against the whetstone. Boone cleaning his gun with the methodical focus of a man whose hands needed work. Calla looking at the satchel in her lap, and Silas looking at the fire with the expression of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had decided consciously, deliberately, that tonight was the night he set it down. Margaret's full name was Margaret Ann Caldwell. When I married her, he said. Everyone stopped. The knife stopped. Boone's hand stopped. The fire popped once in the silence. We had a cabin outside Abilene, Montana, small place. Built it myself in the spring of '74. She was 22, I was 27. We had a son. His name was William. He was 4 years old. He said the boy's name the way you set down something made of glass, carefully, deliberately, with full awareness that it could shatter. William liked catching frogs, Boone said softly from the other side of the fire. And the echo, the connection to Everett's frogs in the creek behind the homestead, hung in the air between all of them, like a thread connecting the living to the dead. He did, Silas said. He got that from Everett. Calla sat very still. She did not move toward him. She did not reach out. She understood that what Silas was doing required space the way a fire requires air. Close the space too quickly, and you smother the thing you are trying to keep alive. There was a rancher near us, Silas continued, his voice perfectly carefully steady. Calloway. He had been fighting Holloway over water rights for 2 years, lived 4 doors down. Margaret and William were home. I was 3 towns over on a job. By the time I got back, he stopped, set the sentence down unfinished because the end of it was a place he could describe but could not revisit. Not fully, not out loud, not even now. The fire inspector said faulty stove, he said, but the stove was brand new, installed 2 months before. Calloway signed Holloway's papers the week after Calla said. She had read the entry. She knew the timeline. Moved his family to Kansas. Yes, I looked for proof for 2 years, Silas said. Tore that territory apart. Talked to every man, woman, and child who might have seen or heard or known something. There was nothing. Holloway does not leave loose ends. He looked at Calla. He looked at the satchel on her knees, until apparently he did. Calla placed her hand on the leather. Page 23, she said. Her voice was not steady, and she did not try to make it steady, because steadiness felt like the wrong thing to offer a man showing her the place where everything had broken. A man Holloway paid directly, not through Ratcher, $200. The date matches. The address of your cabin. Emmett set his knife down. Everett knew, Calla said. He was building a case. He wrote to Crawford. He wrote to Amos Whitfield. He was making sure that if anything happened to him, the evidence would still reach the right hands. He never told me, Silas said. He was protecting you, Calla said. He was afraid of what you would do. She held his gaze across the fire, the flames between them throwing light and shadow across both their faces. He was right to be afraid, she said, but he was also right to build the record, because the record is what survives. Silas looked at the fire, his hands flat on his knees, something in his face giving way layer by layer to something raw and unguarded and very, very tired. The kind of tired that sleep does not fix. William, he said, just the name. Quiet, like he was telling someone far away that they had not been forgotten. William, Calla said. Because the name deserved to be heard by more than one voice. William, Boone said from across the fire. 3 voices in the dark. The boy's name held by people who had never held the boy. Silas looked at all of them, and something shifted, not healed, nothing so complete as that, but redistributed. Like a weight that had been carried alone was now being carried by more hands. And the difference, though, it did not make the weight lighter, made the carrying possible. I will get you to Crawford, he said, whatever it takes. I know, Calla said. I knew it when you told me about the money in the creek. They hit Blackthorn Pass at mid-morning, and the pass was a liar. From a distance, it looked manageable. Up close, the July rain had turned the narrow trail between two rock faces into something that was not quite mud and not quite water, but was worse than both. Cannon pushed through with the patience of experience. Ghost moved like his name. Trouble went through the way Boone went through everything head down and determined. Rosie balked, all 4 feet planted, head down. The particular body language of a horse that had made a decision and meant it entirely. Calla dismounted without hesitation. She took the reins close to the bit and walked forward, putting herself on the narrow path first, the rock wall inches from her right shoulder. The drop on the left, not deep, but deep enough. She talked to Rosie in a low, steady murmur. Good girl, just like this. 1 step. There you go. Silas sat on Cannon and watched. He did not help. Not because he did not want to, but because he recognized in the set of Calla's shoulders and the calm of her voice that helping would be the wrong thing. She needed to do this. Rosie needed to see her do it. After 3 of the longest seconds of the morning, Rosie moved. They came through the other side, and Calla pressed her forehead against the mare's warm neck and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. Do not say anything, she said. I was not going to say anything. You had a look like you were about to. My face does that, Silas said. I do not always mean it. She almost laughed. It kept happening, these almost laughs, in the middle of everything, and she had stopped being surprised by them. 4 miles down the eastern slope, the rider came, fast from the direction of Juniper Springs. Emmett heard the hoof beats first and raised one hand. The formation tightened. Silas reached for his rifle. Boone drew his gun. The rider hauled back hard when he saw them. Young, maybe 21, a badge on his vest small and slightly bent. The badge of a man who had not had the job long enough for it to wear properly. Nolan Fletcher, he said, both hands raised. Deputy out of Juniper Springs. Ada Thornton sent a rider to Sheriff Dawson this morning. I have been sent to find you. He produced a folded paper. Silas read it. His expression did not change, but something in his shoulders shifted. He handed it to Calla. The wire was short. Crawford's hand. Miss Ashford. Word has reached me of Everett Lockhart's work. I have been expecting you. Come directly. Do not stop. Do not trust local law. Crawford. Calla looked at Nolan. Nolan looked back with the expression of a man who had read the wire and was fully aware of the irony. Sheriff Dawson asked me to tell you he has never taken a cent from Garrett Holloway in 8 years, Nolan said carefully. He also said Ratcher and 2 men rode through Juniper Springs an hour ago, asking everyone on the street if they had seen a woman and 3 men coming down from Blackthorn. There is one route through, Amos Whitfield's land. The last time Amos Whitfield saw you, Nolan said to Silas with careful diplomacy, he told Sheriff Dawson that if you ever set foot on his property again, he would meet you with a shotgun. I remember, Silas said. Something about his nephew Nolan ventured. His nephew stole a horse. I brought him in. Whitfield knew it was right. He did not like it. I will talk to Whitfield, Silas said. Whitfield's ranch house appeared after 20 minutes of cutting through brush. Low-slung stone and timber built by someone who intended to stay and never leave. On the porch, in a wooden chair built for a man of considerable size, sat Amos Whitfield, white-bearded, past 60, shotgun across his knees. He saw them coming from 100 yards and did not move. The conversation was short. Whitfield had every reason to turn them away and one reason not to. Everett Lockhart had written him a letter 6 months before he died. The letter had told Whitfield about the ledger, about the 47 families, and it had told him something else. Said his bride-to-be was the one who inspired him. Whitfield said, looking at Calla with eyes that were measuring the woman against the letter, said she wrote to him that a man who keeps records has a responsibility to what they say. Calla's breath caught. She had written those words. In a letter, in February, in Boston. Late at night by candlelight, not knowing she was saying anything that mattered. Everett had remembered. Everett had written it down. Everett had sent it to a stranger on a Montana ranch as proof that the woman he loved, understood what he was doing and why. Whitfield opened the gate, Calla rode through, and as they passed, Whitfield spoke once more to Silas. My nephew is out of jail, working my west pasture 2 years. Better man for what he learned. Pause. Still think you could have found another way. I could not, Silas said. I know, Whitfield said. Does not mean I have to like it. He closed the gate behind them. They crested the final rise and the land spread out ahead of them. And there at the far edge, a glint of tin in the afternoon sun, a single structure. Low to the ground, no road leading to it. 3 horses tied outside, Dutch Silas said. He came ahead, Calla said slowly. The calculation was running behind her eyes fast and clear. He knew about Blackthorn. He knew about Whitfield's land. Someone told him our route. The cabin sat directly in their path. No way around it without adding hours they did not have. He is not waiting to take me back, Calla said. Ratcher wants me alive. Holloway needs to know what I have and who I have talked to. Dutch does not have those orders. He is waiting to make sure the ledger never reaches Crawford. It does not matter what happens to me. She said it plainly because it was plain. Silas looked at her. Something moved in his face, not fear for himself. He had moved past fear for himself years ago, something else. The same thing she had seen at the fire when she said the name Abilene. Here is what we do, Silas said. Emmett takes the high ground. West Ridge, 200 yards. He covers the cabin from above. Boone and I ride at it from 2 angles, north and east. We draw them out. When they come out, I ride south. Calla finished. Hard. Give me 70 seconds on the open ground, she said. Rosie can do it. Do not decide for me what I can handle, Calla said. And her voice carried the weight of everything she had learned in these days about what happened when people tried to protect each other by withholding the truth. Everett made that mistake. He thought he was protecting me by not telling me things. He was wrong. So do not do that. 70 seconds, Silas said. That is all I am asking for. You had better still be breathing when I come back with Crawford's men. I intend to be. Intend harder, she said. Emmett moved to the high ground, silent and fast. Within minutes, he was invisible in the rocks above the cabin, positioned with his rifle the way he positioned everything carefully, precisely, without wasted motion. Boone checked his gun. His hands were steady. His eyes were burning. This was what he had needed. A direction. A fight. Something to ride at. Everett's death had become a weight he could not lift. This was a weight he could throw. Calla looked at Silas. He looked at her. The afternoon sun was behind him, and his face was half shadow and half light, and his amber eyes were not flat. They had not been flat for days. They were alive and present and looking at her with something that neither of them had named and that she was not going to name now. Not on the edge of something dangerous, not with 70 seconds between her and the open road. Go, she said. Silas turned cannon north. Boone went east. And Calla pressed her heels into Rosie's sides, and the mare who had balked at a narrow mountain pass that morning ran like she knew exactly what was being asked of her and had decided to answer. Behind her, she heard Silas call out, loud, carrying, the voice of a man who had decided to be heard. She heard the cabin door slam open, voices. Boone's gun sharp and immediate. Return fire. More than one shooter. Dutch had not been alone, and then she heard the shot, one shot, single, clean. Calla's hands tightened on the reins, and she told Rosie to keep running, and she did not turn around. She told herself she did not turn around because the ledger mattered more, because 47 families mattered more, because Judge Crawford was a day's ride south, and every second she lost was a second Ratcher closed the gap from behind. She told herself and she kept riding, and the sound of that single shot sat in the center of her chest like a stone she had swallowed. Then from a different angle from the ridge, Emmett's rifle, 2 shots in quick succession, and Boone's voice shouting something she could not make out, and more fire, the rapid exchange of a fight that had escalated beyond the plan. She kept riding. She owed it to Everett, to 47 names in careful handwriting, to William who had liked catching frogs. She was a half-mile out when the rider came up behind her. Fast, staying on the road, not trying to cut her off from the sides. She turned her head just enough. Nolan Fletcher, riding hard, bent badge catching the afternoon light. He is alive, Nolan shouted over the wind and hoofbeats. He is pinned down. Dutch was not alone. Two of them inside. Emmett got one from the ridge. Boone took Dutch. But Silas caught a bullet going in his shoulder. How bad he was still moving when I left. He told me to catch you. Nolan glanced at her. He said to tell you to keep riding and not do anything foolish. That was the word he used. Foolish. He also said Nolan hesitated. Say it. He said if you turn around before you reach Crawford, he will be extremely irritated. Despite everything, the shot echoing in her chest, the blood she had not seen but knew was there. The man she could not name what she felt about lying wounded in a relay cabin behind her. Despite all of it, Calla Ashford almost laughed. Because even now, even shot and pinned, and being entirely Silas about the whole thing, the man found the exact words. Ratcher, she said. South Road. Moving, not running. Riding like a man who knows where you are going and figures he can get there the same time you do. Nolan's voice tightened. He is not trying to catch you on the open road, Miss Ashford. He is trying to be there when you arrive. The calculation landed on her like a physical weight. Holloway had people in Helena. He had to. A man who had bought county officials across 3 counties did not stop at city limits. There is a shortcut, Calla said, east of the main road, 3 miles south, creek crossing, low water usually. Probably not today. You know this country? Nolan looked at her with genuine surprise. Everett described every mile of it in his letters. I have been writing his descriptions for 3 days. She turned rosy east without slowing down. The creek crossing was not knee-high. The July rain had done exactly what July rain did to low creek crossings in central Montana. Turned them from inconvenient to genuinely dangerous. Brown water moving fast, the far bank steep and muddy. The whole thing about twice as wide as it had any right to be in summer. Nolan pulled up at the edge. That is chest high on a generous estimate. Swim then, Calla said, and put Rosie in before she could think too carefully about it. The cold hit her like a fist. Even in July, the creek water ran cold, fed by snowfields somewhere above. Rosie lunged and scrambled, and for 4 seconds, Calla was holding the satchel above her head, with both arms relying entirely on a horse she had known for 3 days to make the right decisions about where to put her feet in moving water. Rosie made the right decisions. She came out the other side blowing hard and indignant, shaking water in every direction. Calla was soaked from the waist down and her boots would never be right again, but the satchel was dry. The 43 pages of Everett's careful handwriting were dry. The names of 47 families were dry. Nolan came through 30 seconds behind her, younger and lighter, and still came out looking like he had reconsidered several of life's choices in the space of 4 seconds. You always ride like that, he asked, wringing water from his hat brim. Only lately, she said, and turned south toward Helena. They came into Helena from the south side through the Stockyards district, and the city hit Calla like something she had forgotten existed. The smell of it first, smoke and horses and cooking meat, and the particular human density of a place where people live close enough to hear each other's arguments through the walls. Then the sound, wagons on packed streets, voices raised in commerce and complaint in the ordinary ongoing business of a territorial capital that did not know and did not care that a woman on a tired horse had been riding toward it for 3 days through mud and over mountains and across a flooding creek with 43 pages of a dead man's handwriting pressed against her body. She did not stop to feel it. There was not time. Crawford's office, she said to Nolan. North side of Main Street. Federal building. Nolan was scanning as they rode, eyes moving across the streets with the systematic attention of a young lawman who was learning in real time that the skills of a small-time deputy translated imperfectly to a city where the threats came from alleys instead of open road. I do not see Ratcher, he said. That means he is already here. They moved through the streets, not running, not slow. The pace of a person who had somewhere to be and intended to get there without drawing the attention of anyone who might be watching for exactly this kind of arrival. The satchel was over Calla's shoulder. The rawhide cord was in her hand. She had not come this far to be hurried into a mistake. They were 2 blocks from the federal building when the man stepped out of the alley. Not Ratcher, someone she did not know. Well-dressed, middle-aged, the posture of a man who had been waiting for a specific person and had just found her. His hands were visible, deliberately so, and his expression carried the particular urgency of someone delivering information that had a shelf life. Miss Ashford, he said. Not loud, just certain. Nolan had his gun out before the second syllable had finished leaving the man's mouth. I work for Judge Crawford, the man said. My name is Edward Marsh. I am his clerk and have been for 11 years. He looked at Calla steadily. He sent me to meet you because Cole Ratcher arrived 40 minutes ago and went straight to the federal building, not to Crawford's office, to the duty marshal's office. A man named Pitts. Nolan said Pitts the way you set down something that has gone bad. Pitts has been on Holloway's payroll since 1874, Marsh said. Crawford knows it. He has been building a case against Pitts as well. He looked at the satchel on Calla's shoulder. He needs what you are carrying to close both cases at once. Holloway and the marshal, who has been protecting him. Marsh held out a folded letter. Nolan took it, read it, handed it to Calla. 3 sentences in a hand she did not know. Clipped and direct. The handwriting of a man who had spent 40 years being precise because precision was the only weapon the law gave him. Miss Ashford, Edward Marsh is my most trusted clerk and has been for 11 years. Do not come in through the front. East entrance courthouse annex on Commerce Street. Crawford. He sent this before Ratcher arrived, Marsh said. He had been expecting Ratcher or someone like him for weeks. Where is Ratcher now? Calla asked. With Pitts. Pitts is trying to get a writ drawn up. Something to justify detaining you and seizing what you are carrying before you reach Crawford. It will not hold up legally, but it does not have to hold up long. It just has to hold long enough to get the ledger out of your hands. How long? Maybe 30 minutes before Pitts signs it, then we move it now, Calla said. There is a problem, Marsh said. There was always a problem. Calla had started to accept that this was simply the nature of things, that every solution carried a complication behind it like a shadow, and the only question worth asking was whether you kept moving anyway. Ratcher left a man on Commerce Street, Marsh said. Watching the east entrance, Calla thought fast. The satchel, Crawford, 30 minutes before a writ, a man on Commerce Street. 3 public entrances to the federal building, plus a loading dock on the west side bolted from the inside. How many doors does the building have, she asked. 3 public, plus the loading dock. But it is bolted from inside. You would need someone already in the building to open it. Is there someone already in the building? Crawford has been in his office since 7 this morning, Marsh said. Calla looked at Nolan. Can you get to the man on Commerce Street and keep him occupied for 10 minutes without shooting anyone? Nolan considered this with the seriousness it deserved. What kind of occupied? Any kind that does not result in a body. I can do that. Then do it. She turned to Marsh. Take me to the loading dock. They went. Through 2 alleys and a side street moving fast. The city flowed around them oblivious. A woman and a man walking with purpose through the back streets of Helena. Nothing unusual, nothing that would make anyone look twice. And Calla thought about how strange that was. How the most important moments of a life could look completely ordinary from the outside. The loading dock was exactly what Marsh had described. Solid door, bolted from inside. Marsh knocked in a pattern. 3 short, 2 long. They waited. Calla counted seconds. She was at 32 when the bolt moved. The door opened and Judge Walter Crawford stood on the other side. She had built an image of him in her mind over the weeks of running. Something imposing, angular. The face of a man whose honesty had survived long enough in a corrupt system to calcify into something formidable. The reality was smaller and older and tired in a way that was somehow more reassuring than imposing would have been. Maybe 65, gray and slight, eyes that were alert in the way of a man who had learned to pay attention at the expense of everything else. He looked like what he was. A man who had spent 40 years reading documents and weighing evidence and making decisions that mattered, and who understood that the quiet work of justice was never as dramatic as the injustice it attempted to correct. He looked at her. He looked at the satchel. Miss Ashford, he said, Judge Crawford, we have less than 30 minutes. Come in. The back corridor of the federal building was narrow and plain and smelled of old paper and floor wax, in the particular institutional stillness of a place where important things were decided slowly. Crawford moved fast for a man his age, leading her up a staircase and through a door and into an office that was so deep in books and files that the books appeared to be the architecture and the walls merely an afterthought. He sat behind his desk. She sat across from him. Marsh stood at the door. Calla placed the leather satchel on the desk between them and untied the rawhide cord with hands that were almost steady. Everett Lockhart was my intended husband, she said. I know, Crawford said. He wrote to me. She looked up. 4 months ago. Crawford reached into his desk and produced a letter. And there it was, Everett's handwriting. That careful, precise hand she would have known anywhere on earth. She had fallen in love with that handwriting on a winter evening in Boston, reading by candlelight, tracing the letters with her fingertip, because touching the ink felt like the closest she could get to touching the man who had made it. Seeing it here in this office, in the judge's weathered hands, landed in her chest like something that had been traveling a very long distance and had finally come home. He told me what he was building, Crawford said. He told me he had documentation of Holloway's entire operation across 3 counties. He told me. Crawford paused, and something moved in his lined face that was close to grief. A judge who had spent decades maintaining professional distance, allowing himself for just a moment the cost of caring about the people whose cases crossed his desk. He told me he was not sure how much time he had, Crawford said, and he wanted me to know that if something happened to him, his bride would know where the records were, and she would come. Calla sat very still. He was that certain you would come, Crawford said. He should have told me, she said, and it came out rougher than she intended. The rawness of a woman who had learned piece by piece over the past week the full scope of what the man she loved had built without her knowledge. The letters to Crawford, the letters to Whitfield, the careful, methodical construction of a path that led from a root cellar in Redstone Hollow to a federal judge's desk in Helena. All of it done quietly, all of it done alone. All of it done with the particular courage of a man who had understood that he might not survive to walk the path himself and had made certain that someone he trusted would. He said you would say that, Crawford said quietly. Calla closed her eyes. 1 second. The space of a single breath, and in that breath she saw him. Not the way she had imagined him, because she had never seen his face, but the way she knew him. Everett at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, writing letters to a judge and a rancher, and a woman in Boston building roads. She did not know she was following, trusting her with a weight he could not carry himself, because he had recognized in her letters the same quality she had recognized in his, the refusal to stop. She opened her eyes. She pushed the satchel across the desk. Then let us finish what he started, she said. Crawford pulled the satchel toward him and began to read. The room went quiet. Only the turn of pages, the distant sounds of the building, the city outside the window carrying on with its ordinary business. And Calla sat in the chair across from the judge with the empty bag in her lap, in the particular stillness that comes when a person has been moving for so long that stopping feels like a different kind of falling. She heard the door open behind her. She turned. Cole Ratcher walked into the room, not through the loading dock, not through Commerce Street, through the main door to Crawford's office, which Marsh had closed but apparently not locked. And Marsh was no longer standing at it. He was against the wall to the left, and the man behind Ratcher had a gun pressed against Marsh's spine. Ratcher was not what she had expected. She had built him in her mind the way she built everything from evidence and inference, and she had imagined someone large and obvious. The kind of man whose capacity for harm was written in his face and his body and the way he moved through the world. He was none of those things. Medium height, ordinary features. The kind of man you would pass on the street and not remember 5 minutes later. The only remarkable thing about him was his eyes. Tired. But not the tired of a man who needed sleep. The tired of a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and had started to forget what it felt like to put it down. He looked at Calla. He looked at the satchel on Crawford's desk. He looked at the pages Crawford had spread in front of him. I need those pages, he said. You need to leave this office, Crawford said without looking up from the documents. I am in the middle of reviewing evidence in a federal case. You are in a federal building without invitation or warrant. Whatever Marshal Pitts told you does not extend to my chambers. He turned a page. And I would remind you, Crawford continued with the particular authority of a man who had spent 40 years being the calmest person in every room he entered, that this building has exits you have not covered. I covered them an hour ago, Ratcher said. You covered the ones you knew about, Crawford said. And Calla looked at Ratcher. She had been watching his face, his eyes specifically, since the moment he walked in. She had learned in these days of running to read what was real and what was performance. Three brothers who communicated through silence and action had taught her to see beneath surfaces, to listen for the thing that was not being said, to watch for the movement that did not match the words. "You knew Everett," she said. Ratcher went still. The gun behind Marsh did not move, but the man holding it shifted his weight, uncertain, responding to a change in the room's temperature that he could feel but not identify. "I found a letter in the homestead," Calla said. After. It was in Everett's desk, not the ledger drawer, the everyday drawer, where he kept ordinary things. It did not have a name on it, but I read it. She kept her voice even, the way she had learned to keep it in the presence of men who responded not to volume, but to steadiness. He wrote it to someone he had known a long time, she said. Someone he said he was sorry to be on the wrong side of. He did not send it. I do not know if he meant to. Maybe he was still deciding. Maybe he was trying to figure out if you could be reached. She looked at the tired in Ratcher's eyes. The particular kind of tired that she was beginning to understand was not exhaustion, but accumulation. The weight of years of choices stacked on top of each other, each one small enough to justify in the moment together, forming something too heavy to carry and too familiar to set down. "Could you," she asked, "be reached?" The man with the gun shifted again. Ratcher raised one hand, palm flat, and the man went still. The gesture was small and automatic, and it told Calla everything she needed to know about the hierarchy in that room and where the actual authority resided. "I have a job," Ratcher said. "You have a choice," Calla said. "Everett believed that. He wrote it to you. Everett is dead." "Yes," and the word came out clean and hard because she had stopped trying to protect herself from it. She had carried it across mountains and through floodwater and into this room, and she was not going to soften it now. "He is." Because he made a choice too. He chose to keep records. He chose to believe that the truth written down was the truth preserved. And he was right about that because the truth is sitting on that desk right now, and it is not going away. She held Ratcher's gaze. "What do you want to be, Cole, when this is over? When Holloway is finished today, or in a year with this ledger or the next one, because Everett was not the only person who kept records. 47 families remember what happened to them. Their names are federal evidence now. They do not disappear because you take these pages. They do not disappear because Holloway wants them to." She put her hand flat on the desk beside the satchel. "What do you want to be left with?" The room held its breath. And then from somewhere below them in the building came two shots fired in quick succession. The sound sharp and unmistakable, echoing up through the floorboards and the stairwell, and into the office where 5 people stood in a configuration that had been frozen and was now in the space between one heartbeat and the next violently in motion. Ratcher turned toward the sound. The man behind Marsh reacted a half-second later, his attention breaking for just that fraction. And Marsh moved, sharp, without hesitation, elbow back hard into the man's ribs. The gun went wide. The shot that discharged went into the ceiling, and plaster came down on all of them like fine white snow. Crawford did not flinch. He pressed the ledger flat with both hands, protective and calm, the gesture of a man who understood with absolute clarity what mattered most in this room and was not going to let it go. Calla was already on her feet, already moving toward the door, because 2 shots from below meant someone down there was alive enough to fire them, and alive was the only word she needed. She took the stairs 2 at a time. The loading dock door was open when she reached it, and Silas Lockhart was standing against the frame, one hand on the wood, the other pressed against his left shoulder where his shirt had gone dark and heavy from the collar down to the belt. He was upright. His eyes were open and tracking. His gun was still in the hand pressed against his side, which meant he had been holding it for the entire walk from wherever he had come from and had not let go, even when letting go would have been the sensible thing. He saw her. And the first thing he said was, "The ledger, Crawford has it," she said. Something in him released. Not a lot, just enough to see. His shoulders dropped a fraction. The breath he let out was long and unsteady and it carried the weight of miles. Behind him, Emmett, steady and whole, his rifle still warm, dust and pine needles in his hair. The particular look of a man who had spent the last several hours lying on a rock ledge with a rifle and had opinions about comfort that he was keeping to himself. And Boone, blood on his shirt sleeve, his own. A bandage wrapped tight around his upper arm that Emmett had tied with the efficiency of a man who had done field medicine before and preferred not to discuss the circumstances. "Three of you," Calla said. "All alive." Boone caught one at the cabin, Emmett said. "Through and through. He will keep the arm." "Damn right I will keep it," Boone said. "Everett would never let me hear the end of it if I lost a shooting arm over a relay cabin." He said Everett's name the way you say the name of someone you have decided to carry forward instead of leave behind. Not with grief removed, but with grief reorganized. Placed somewhere it could coexist with purpose. Calla went to Silas. She got her arm under his good side and felt his weight shift onto her without argument, which told her more about how bad it actually was than anything he was going to admit out loud. "Do not say you are fine," she said. "I was not going to say I was fine. You were about to. I was about to say it is not as bad as it looks. That is the same thing." The stairs above them erupted with organized noise, Crawford's voice carrying authority. Federal deputies, real ones, moving with purpose. And behind all of them, walking with his hands visible and his face doing something complicated and unfinished, came Cole Ratcher, uncuffed. Crawford came to the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the four of them. Silas, bleeding. Boone bandaged. Emmett covered in trail dust. Calla soaked from the waist down with creek water and plaster dust in her hair. "It is done," Crawford said. "Pitts is in custody. My deputies have been positioned in the building since this morning. I sent for them before Ratcher ever arrived." He held up the satchel. "The ledger is intact. I have read enough to open proceedings. A full indictment against Garrett Holloway will be drawn up before this week is out." Calla heard the words. She heard them in the right order. She understood what they meant. And she still had to run them through a second time before they settled into something she could believe. "It is done," she said. "The legal process has significant work ahead of it," Crawford said, with the precision of a man who had learned to be careful with hope. "But the foundation is laid. Whatever it built, it will hold." When they moved toward the door, Calla passed Ratcher on the stairs. She stopped. He looked at her with those tired eyes. "I told your judge what I know," Ratcher said. "Names, dates, specifics." His voice was flat and carrying something underneath the flatness that might have been the early stages of relief still too new to trust. "Holloway will say I am lying to save myself. He might be partly right. Is that all? No. There is a line I did not cross. Everett Lockhart. That was not my order. I did not know it was coming. I found out after." Something moved in his jaw. "I want that on the record." Calla stood with that. She did not forgive him. She did not have enough information yet to know what forgiveness would even mean here. But she believed the specific thing he was saying. And she believed that saying it cost him something. And she filed it where it belonged. "I will tell Crawford," she said. She walked out into the afternoon. 3 weeks later, Garrett Holloway was arrested at his ranch outside Redstone Hollow by 4 federal deputies and a United States Marshal from the territorial capital. He walked out in a pressed suit with his hat on straight. He did not fight it. He had known it was coming. Calla heard about it from Nolan, who rode to Helena specifically to tell her in person. They sat in the small dining room of the boarding house where she had taken a room. Clean, quiet, run by a widow named Mrs. Aldridge, who asked no questions and made excellent coffee. Crawford's office contacted 31 of the 47 families, Nolan told her. Not a single one was surprised. They all knew what happened to them. They just did not know someone had written it down. Calla thought about Everett at the kitchen table writing names he might never have known personally, writing them down because the record demanded it, because the truth unrecorded was the truth lost. "My father's land," Nolan said. "Gideon Fletcher, 40 acres in Beaverhead County. Crawford says there is a restitution process. It will not give the land back. Holloway sold most of it on. But there will be compensation. Your father's name is in that record, Nolan. It is federal now. It does not go away." Nolan nodded. He left the next morning. And that evening the knock came. 2 taps, a pause, 2 more. She knew it the way she knew the sound of her own breathing. She had learned it in a hallway in Pine Ridge and had heard it in her mind every night since. She opened the door. Silas stood in the hallway. He looked better, not healed. The shoulders still moved carefully, and there was a line of tension around his eyes that the doctor said would ease and probably meant months. But present, more present than he had been since she met him, like a man who had been somewhere very deep and was slowly finding his way back to the surface. Hat in hand, the way he always held it when he had something to say. I went to see Ratcher, he said, yesterday, at the federal holding facility. I needed to know about the fire, about Margaret and William, from his face directly. He turned the hat brim once in his hands. He did not know, Silas said. Said it straight to my face with nothing in it for him. No deal pending on that charge. Nothing to gain. He said Holloway ordered it himself. Did not go through Ratcher at all. Used a man Ratcher had never even met. Do you believe him? Yes, I believe that too. He looked at her. It does not change anything. Margaret is gone. William is gone. But it changes where I put it, what I do with it. I am going to stop bounty hunting, he said. Completely. Crawford mentioned he needs investigators. People who know the territory. People who can be trusted to bring back what is true without shaping it to fit what someone wants to hear. You would work for Crawford. I would work for the law. The actual law. Not whoever is paying the bounty. He paused. It would keep me in this part of Montana for a while. Maybe longer. The school board wrote back, Calla said. The teaching position was filled. I asked if there was another need. There are 47 families that are going to need help. Documentation, statements, someone to sit with people while they remember things they have been trying not to remember. She looked at her hands. Everett was a bookkeeper. I am a teacher. Both are just ways of making sure something is understood and recorded and carried forward. Silas looked at her for a long moment. You know what the difference is, he said, between you and every other person I have met in 9 years of this work. She shook her head. You do not stop. Not ever. Not when you are on your knees. Not when the school board fills the position. Not when you have lost the person who was supposed to be doing this with you. The words landed in her chest and stayed there. Everett would have liked you, she said. He would have found you extremely aggravating for about 2 days, and then he would have decided you were the most trustworthy person he had met in years. He was a good judge of people. He was right about Crawford. He was right about Whitfield. He was right about a lot of things. He was right about you, Silas said. She stood up. Because sitting felt like the wrong posture for what was happening. Because the careful distance they had maintained, respectful and necessary, and also sometimes like holding her breath, had reached its natural limit. Not because everything was resolved, but because it did not have to be resolved to be real. She took the step between them. She placed her hand against his chest, careful of the shoulder, and felt his heart under her palm. Steady, present. The heartbeat of a man who had walked 4 miles on a bullet wound and ridden a day through mountains because he could not stand the thought of not knowing how it came out. I am not replacing Everett, she said. I know that, he said immediately. And I am not replacing Margaret. I know that too. He put his hand over hers, the one on his chest. I do not know what I am yet. I told you I am working on it. So am I, she said. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. It was not a declaration. It was not a resolution. It was 2 people standing in a small room in Helena in the 3rd week of July, 1878, with their histories fully present between them and their hands in contact, and the full knowledge that the road ahead was neither clean nor simple nor any of the things that roads and stories sometimes pretended to be. It was the most honest thing either of them had said in weeks. Then the knock came, Mrs. Aldridge's voice through the door. Miss Ashford, a letter arrived for you, marked urgent, from Judge Crawford's office. 2 lines. Crawford's hand. Holloway has entered a plea. His lead attorney has requested a meeting with you personally. Claims his client wishes to make a direct statement to Everett Lockhart's intended before proceedings begin. Your attendance is voluntary. She handed it to Silas. He read it. His face did several things in quick succession and settled into careful watchfulness. You do not have to go, he said. I know what he is doing. He wants to see who he is dealing with. He wants to know if I can be moved. She folded the letter. He already had his chance to take my measure. He sent men to a porch on a Tuesday morning and took the man I crossed a continent to marry. And he left his brothers standing in the yard to watch. Her voice was level. Her hands were steady. Every word was the plain truth spoken by a woman who had earned the right to speak it. I did not stop. I walked through mountains and across a flooding creek and into a building full of his people. And I put Everett's ledger in front of a federal judge. She picked up her jacket. "But I am not going to that meeting." She wrote the reply herself, 4 words in her own hand. The record speaks for itself. She sealed it and handed it to Mrs. Aldridge in the hall. Silas was standing where she had left him when she came back into the room, hat in hand, and on his face for the first time since she had known him fully and without reservation. Not almost, not nearly, but the actual thing was a smile. A real one, Becun, the kind that changed a face entirely. The kind that made amber eyes look like they had been relit from inside after a long time in the dark. What she said. Nothing, he said. "Then Everett was right about you. You keep saying that. I will keep saying it until it stops being true." So, indefinitely, the autumn came. Then winter. Calla stayed in Montana through the trial, testifying for 3 days in a voice that was steady and clear and carried across the courtroom, the way truth carries when it has been written down by honest hands and delivered by someone who will not be moved. Crawford told her afterward in private Everett chose well. Silas began his work as an investigator for Crawford's office. Emmett returned to the mountains, but not far. He built a second cabin on the Lockhart homestead, close enough to share meals, far enough to keep the silence he needed. Boone, in a development that surprised everyone except Calla, took work with Nolan Fletcher at Juniper Springs. Nolan said he needed someone who was not afraid to ride at things. This was an accurate description of Boone. When the first snow fell, Calla returned to the homestead. Not as a guest, the cabin that had been Everett's was now something else. A schoolroom. The kitchen table where he had written his letters became the desk where she taught reading and arithmetic to the children of the valley. 23 students by spring, some of them children of the 47 families. A traveling preacher came through in May of 1879. The ceremony was on the porch where Everett had sat with his morning coffee on the last day of his life. Calla wore the blue dress, the one she had pressed in St. Louis and guarded from dust on the stagecoach and worn across 2,000 miles to meet a man she would never meet. She wore it now for a different reason, and the wearing felt right. Emmett stood as witness. Boone rode from Juniper Springs and stood beside Silas with wet eyes he did not hide. Nolan Fletcher came with his badge, no longer bent. Silas spoke his vows the way he spoke everything, briefly, without decoration, with the full weight of a man who meant every word and intended to prove it through decades of action rather than a single moment of speech. "I promise you what I promise everyone," he said. "Actions, not words. You will see it every day. That is the only promise I know how to keep." Calla said, "Everett built the road that brought me here. You stood on that road and held out your hand. I took it. That is the whole story, and I will never let go." The door closed softly behind them that evening. And when morning came, everything had changed between them, and everything was exactly as it should have been. Their son was born in 1880. They named him William. Nobody asked why. Everybody knew. Silas held the boy with hands that had split firewood and tracked fugitives and thrown $100 into a creek, and those hands trembled as they cradled something smaller and more important than anything they had ever held before. Their daughter came in 1884, Margaret. And the first time Silas held her, Calla saw on his face the thing she had been waiting years to see. Not the almost smile, not the memory of where a smile used to live. The real thing, complete and unreserved, as though something that had been locked away since Abilene had finally found the key. The years passed the way years pass in mountain country, measured not in dates but in seasons, the rhythm of snowmelt and planting and harvest and the first frost. The ranch grew. Emmett's cabin became permanent. The schoolhouse got its own building separate from the kitchen with glass windows that Silas installed, himself cutting his hand on the third pane and cursing with a creativity that made William, who was 6, laugh so hard he fell off the porch. Boone married a school teacher in Juniper Springs. Nolan Fletcher was best man. Holloway died in prison in 1886. Calla heard the news, folded the newspaper, set it on the table. She did not speak about it. She did not need to. Everett's ledger sat in a glass case in the federal courthouse in Helena. Federal evidence. Permanent. The 43 pages of careful handwriting preserved under glass, available for anyone who wanted to see what one honest man's record could accomplish when it reached the right hands. And on the hill behind the homestead under the tall pine, the wooden cross weathered with the years, but was kept clean. Every spring, someone placed wildflowers beside it, usually William, sometimes Boone when he visited. Once Calla found flowers there that she had not placed and no one claimed, and she suspected Emmett, though she never asked, and he never said because that was Emmett's way. Years turned to decades. Silas's hair went silver at the temples. Calla's eyes gathered lines around them, the kind that came from smiling, the only kind worth earning. William grew tall and quiet like his Uncle Emmett, and stubborn like his father, and honest like the uncle whose name he carried. Margaret grew into a teacher like her mother, taking over the schoolhouse when Calla finally stepped back, carrying the work forward the way Calla had carried the ledger, through whatever terrain was necessary, without stopping. On an afternoon in late summer, many years after a woman in a blue dress had stepped off a stagecoach into a silence she did not understand, Calla sat on the porch of the homestead in the chair that had been Everett's and then hers, and now was simply the chair where she sat every evening to watch the light change on the mountains. Silas was beside her, slower now. The shoulder ached when the weather turned, which in Montana was often. But his eyes, those amber eyes that had been deliberately flat the day she met him, were fully alive, had been for years, lit from inside the way they had been meant to be before grief had dimmed them. In the yard, William's children chased each other through wildflowers. Their laughter carried across the valley and up into the pines and off the ridgeline and came back as echo, as though the mountains themselves were remembering what it sounded like when the land was full. Margaret stood at the gate waving to someone on the road. Nolan Fletcher, perhaps, who was sheriff now, and visited when the road brought him south. Or one of the families, the 31 who had been found, and the others who had found their way back over the years, drawn by the record that bore their names and the knowledge that someone had written them down. "Do you remember the day I arrived?" Calla said. "I remember," Silas said. "You stood in front of Dawson's store looking like a woman who was about to fight the entire world with 47 letters. I was ready," she said. "I know. That was the moment I understood Everett was right about you." She placed her hand over his. The hand that was scarred and calloused and large, the hand that had built everything around them from the ashes of what had been lost. Her hand was smaller, but it had never been weaker. Not once, not ever. "He built the road," Calla said. "I walked it. We built the home." The Montana sun fell warm on their faces. The mountains stood behind them the way mountains always stood, patient, permanent, unchanged by the lives that played out in their shadows, but holding those lives in the landscape of their memory all the same. The creek ran silver, the pines held the wind, and the children ran through the wildflowers calling to each other in voices that would carry generation to generation the way names carry when they have been written down by honest hands. Calla Ashford had stepped off a stagecoach with nothing but a bundle of letters and $40, traveling to meet a husband who was already buried under a pine tree she had never seen. And from that, she had built this, all of this, a life not described in letters, but lived in the full and imperfect and beautiful reality of days, that added up to years, that added up to a legacy that would not be forgotten, because it had been in every way that mattered recorded. She had never been the kind of woman who stopped. And now at last she had a family who knew that about her, who had always known, who had ridden beside her through mountains and fire and floodwater and the long quiet years that followed, who would carry the record forward the way she had carried it, the way Everett had intended. Not because it was easy, because it was true, and the truth once written does not stop.